The first translation. In 1878, adopting an aphoristic style that simultaneously reflected the declining state of his own health and his recent break with Wagner, Friedrich Nietzsche published Human All Too Human, a book for free spirits. Only 1,000 copies were printed, and of these, only 120 were sold. 11 of the sales took place at the Konrad Josef bookstore in Munich to the members of Josef Konrad Josefsson's Socialist Reading Circle. In the margins of his own copy, Josefsson mounted a vigorous and enthusiastic response to Nietzsche's arguments. He disagreed with nearly every statement Nietzsche made, yet the book filled him with an almost joyous energy, a kind of atheistic afflatus. 110 years later, as Roger McAllister deciphered Josefsson's commentary, he couldn't help smiling at the idealistic bookseller and his spirited defense of the values he held so dear: compassion, volition, benevolence, community. In the intellectual debate between author and devoted reader, Josefsson was clearly outclassed. Yet there was something charming about the way this generous family man felt bold enough to go toe-to-toe with the bitter neurasthenic genius. On the day the reading circle was to gather, a wrapped bundle arrived at the bookstore posted from Grusau Abbey in Silesia. Josefsson opened the package, found a manuscript within, and spent a few moments glancing over the first few pages. He presumed, of course, that the manuscript was from his friend, Adalbert Kerr, the only resident of the abbey. But instead of a personal note, Josefsson could find only a brief discussion of medieval High German prosody, which concluded that the enterprise of translating its strophes into modern German verse was doomed, utterly doomed. Puzzled, Josefsson set the manuscript aside and went to host his reading circle. Of the book circle's discussion that evening, no record exists, a lacuna for which Roger McAllister was most grateful. To be honest, and Roger McAllister could be honest, late at night, alone, with a decent claret in hand. At such times, in fact, he fancied himself to be brutally honest. The only thing interesting about Josef Konrad Josefsson was that his descendants had become rich enough to pay McAllister to be interested. The only thing interesting about Nietzsche was that he was good, a damned fine writer, and McAllister could always recognize quality when he saw it. And as for the ephemeral reactions of a group of 19th-century German leftists to a badly printed first edition marred by excessive marginalia, well, there could have been nothing interesting in that room at all. For McAllister, there was only one thing of any interest in the Konrad Josef bookstore on that distant day in 1878, that manuscript, Adalbert Kerr's translation, the very pages that McAllister had just found underneath the copy of Menschliches, also Menschliches, in the Josephson family's chest of Nazi papers. After the reading circle adjourned, Josefsson returned to his desk where the manuscript from Grusau Abbey awaited him. No doubt his book circle had left his mind buzzing with ideas. No doubt he found it difficult to sleep. Perhaps one of his children was ill and fussing with a mild fever. In any case, Josef Sohn stayed up all night reading. Despite the lack of an introductory letter, it soon became clear that this manuscript was Adalbert Kehr's translation into modern German prose of his great discovery, the Heinrich Lied, which he had found in a secret library deep within the recesses of Grusau Abbey. In the morning, Josef Sohn's wife arose to find her husband agitated and distraught. She begged him to rest. He refused to go to bed, but consented to retire to the back room of the bookstore, where there was a daybed, a small desk, and no windows. His wife shut the door, hoping he would sleep. But instead, Josef Sohn lit a candle, and there in the back room, surrounded by the Judaica he had hidden from his secular comrades, he spent the day writing and rewriting a letter to Kehr. McAllister found 7 drafts of the letter, and from internal evidence deduced the existence of at least 4 or 5 more, which must have been torn up and discarded, or perhaps sent. In the first draft, Josef Sohn inquired as to the health of his friend, and then, in an overwritten scrawl, asked himself whether Freund was too strong a word for someone he had known for 5 days of radical exhilaration, followed by 3 years of exchanging letters, especially when the letters from Kehr had routinely ignored whatever his friend had written. In his second draft, Josef Sohn volunteered to visit Grusau, but then immediately withdrew the offer, because, after all, his wife was pregnant. The third, fourth, and fifth drafts became increasingly less personal and more forceful, more focused on the text itself. Josef Sohn adopted the tone of a polemicist and denounced the Henry portrayed in the manuscript. Grudgingly, Josef Sohn conceded that Henry's victory over the Catholic Church might have played a part in the dialectic of progress, but this Henry was no symbol of the potential of German culture, no hero to the working classes of the 19th century, just a strong man who callously sent other men to their deaths. Only a general, or a criminal overlord, or a factory manager, or one of their militarist lackeys could find anything to admire in this Henry IV, Holy Roman Emperor of the Salian dynasty. In the sixth draft, Josef Sohn abandoned literary criticism and addressed Kehr directly. He asked his one-time companion whether he ever had any real commitment to the socialist movement. "Even in Gotha," he wrote, "there was something of the tourist in your manner. But you were not an infiltrator. No. It pains me even to consider the idea long enough to reject it." In the seventh draft, Josef Sohn bluntly stated his belief that Kehr had gone mad. "I do not believe that what you have sent me is a translation. I do not believe you have discovered a medieval manuscript in the cellars of the monastery. I believe you have lost your mind and composed a fantasy that conjoins Bismarck and the Kaiser into one false and monstrous hero. If you recover your senses, you are always welcome in Munich. Your friend, Konrad Josef.